I'm very kind of honored to have Alishba come and talk to us. I know she's a very passionate lady, and she'll talk about women's empowerment and the dampening on empowerment that religion puts on women and so on and so forth. I think that I'm not going to give her a lot of introduction because you saw the blurb that I put in, and you probably know quite a bit about her, and that's why you came. So there it is.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, George, and the honor is mine that you guys are here to hear me talk, and it's amazing, and it'll become apparent why I'm so grateful that there are people like you out there that do not think that a woman talking shit about religion should be shitted upon. So, to begin, I actually wanted to start with a story. So I was 12 years old, and this is me in Pakistan. So those of you who don't know my background, I grew up in Pakistan, and then I came to Canada about 11 years ago. I went to Pearson College in BC. I did my IB there. So I got a scholarship, and then I left the country, and I've been away from craziness for the most part since then. So this is me when I was 12, and I was in Pakistan, and I had just come back from school, and I was just lying on my couch inside my home. This is my house. My parents are there. My siblings are there. And I'm really, really tired, and I am lying on my couch, and I'm reading. It's probably 4 in the afternoon, and I fall asleep. The next thing I remember is being violently shaken awake by a relative who had come to visit, and her objection was that she had 2 objections. And I was woken up like maybe half an hour after I'd fallen asleep. First objection, I was sleeping on my stomach, so my butt was up in the air, and like pretty much like how my 18-month-old daughter sleeps now, and I was sleeping. That was first objection. Second objection was girls should never sleep so deep that they can't wake up at the first call. So apparently she'd been trying to wake me up for a couple of minutes, and when I didn't wake up, she violently shook me and woke me up. Now, what does that make you think of? It's a 12-year-old child, right? I hadn't even had my period then. So I was a child by all definitions. And this is the objection she had, that my body was too sexy, I was sleeping without being covered, and anything could happen to me, and I was so tuned out. I was like, how dare I fall asleep in deep sleep that I can't wake up at the, first hint of sound. So that's the background that I come from. I'm not saying that, that's the environment that I grew up in. My parents were extremely understanding, well ahead of the communities they were raised in, despite the restrictions placed upon them. And to provide you evidence of that fact, that my 24/7 upbringing was not as crazy as that particular incident. So that was me at 12, and then fast forward to 17 years old, I'm sitting in Canadian Immigration Office for my student visa interview. So this lady, she is interviewing me to decide if she's going to give me the student visa. And the first question she asked me was, you're 17 years old, you're going to Canada, other end of the country, of the planet, and this was the first time ever I was going to travel. My parents never had enough resources to, go on vacations or do anything, so I pretty much lived my entire life in that one city for 17 years. So this was the first time I was traveling, and her question was, in your culture, this is not acceptable. Are your parents on board? And how come your parents have allowed a 17-year-old girl to go out on her own? And this was such a strange question. Not because it was not happening elsewhere, not because I had not seen other girls my age being told by their parents they couldn't come to the Christmas party at school, because I went to a Catholic school. So they couldn't come to Christmas party because, all the girls are going to be wearing like jeans and shirts and whatever, and they don't want them going there. Girls would be dancing. They don't want their daughters going to Christmas parties and things like that. So going outside the country on their own was completely out of question. That's something they had never even played with, right? But that was always an open possibility for me. It was never a restriction for me. So it was a very strange question that an immigration officer had the audacity to ask me this, how dare your parents allow you? And I was like, well, both of my parents are teachers, so they understand the value of education. And it's a full scholarship. And it was a pretty sweet scholarship. So it was...
Canadian immigration officer?
Yes, this was a Canadian immigration officer. Right? So I understand her concern. I understand why she asked that question, because she had never actually seen... She was probably a newer officer, and this was 2007. Right? So it's not like there was like huge waves of, educated women leaving the country. And most of the time, scholarships are only open to postgraduate students, so I was leaving at a high school level. Right? So it was a bit of an anomaly, and it was an unusual scholarship to leave the country for high school education abroad. So that was, and then I explained to her that both of my parents are teachers, and throughout the process, from the first day I applied for my scholarship to the day I got accepted, the question of whether we should let our daughter go never came up, ever. That discussion never happened, right? So that's the background that I come from. So it was that incident that happened to me with a relative was an anomaly. This is just to give you a background of the kind of culture that I come from, the kind of oppression that I've seen. And I'm not here to tell you sob stories, right? That, oh my God, I was in shambles and then, I feel liberated. I think I've been liberated all my life. It just took me a while to really put that to use, and I'll come back to that at the end of the talk, and you'll see where. Another incident that I can think of is, I'm not, this is a very hazy memory. I'm not really sure where we were, but this was a young girl we were distantly related to, and her parents were arguing about something. I think it was a wedding, and her parents were arguing about something, and then the young girl talked to her dad, and then she told him, "Why aren't you slapping mom? She's being ridiculous and arguing with you." Right? And I know that their parents, her parents did not have that kind of relationship, hitting and stuff, whatever. But that young girl, and I think she was under 10. I think she was maybe 8 or 9 years old at the time. And she, this was a solution for her, the suggesting her dad that you can slap my mom because she's being ridiculous, right? So where are all of these ideas coming from if it's not happening in our home? Just like oppression wasn't happening in my home, but I was already exposed to it. And well before the age of 12, the incident that I told you was something that, that's is very, very prominent in my memory. But a lot of things happened before then that hinted to me that there is a problem, and that caused me to rebel against, everything cultural later on. Now, where does this kind of rage in men and this internalized misogyny in women come from? To analyze all of this stuff, we kind of have to go back. And by rage, let me just define a little bit. By rage, I mean, you can see this kind of, violence against the idea of a liberated woman, even in societies like Canada, within immigrant populations. You can absolutely see that, right? In Mississauga, a few years ago, 2 sisters were murdered by their father, Pakistani father, because they decided to take the hijab off in their school and go off and just wear jeans and have a boyfriend, right? That is the value of a woman's life. Now, where all of this rage comes from, I think it has a lot to do with the complex relationship with sex and violence in religions. Now, Islam specifically, and this is like, you can find examples of violence and sex conflated in almost all major religions, but I'm going to talk more about Islam today because that is what was more prevalent in my community or in my environment. I shouldn't say my community, because the community, again, that I was surrounded by was very understanding and liberal. What do I mean by the relationship between sex and violence? Enjoying sex is such a scary concept in religion that religion mandated that you should go ahead and take your infant son and chop their dicks off, pretty much, right? Without putting any, administering any pain medication or anything of the sort. You are subjecting a child, like less than 7 days old child, to excruciating pain. You wouldn't think of doing any unnecessary thing to your genitals, but these people are thinking of, they do it to their infants, right? And one of the theories is that it would discourage boys from masturbating if you administer circumcision at a very young age. The same concept goes with female genital mutilation. Cutting the clitoris, taking away that pleasure from sex and using it exclusively, using human bodies exclusively as incubators. But at the same time, if you are good to God, you get to go to this eternal, amazing place where you can have fuckloads of sex with all ages and with women and girls. According to Islamic tradition, they are so beautiful that their skin is super white and transparent that you can actually see them swallowing grapes. Like that's how much in detail, Pornhub Islam goes into that. It's really like the desire, like if you kill your pleasures right now, you're going to get the same pleasure 10 times over. So that's your goal. Go towards that reward, but be violent towards it in this world, right? So when a young boy is getting these mixed messages, when a young man is seeing that that sex is something to be enjoyed, he's not even allowed to touch himself, explore his sexuality in a safe environment. And I'm talking about men, and I'll tell you how it ties to women. When a young man has these really fucked up ideas about sexuality, how do you think he's going to respond to that when he comes into contact with a woman he desires? Obviously, it's going to turn into a very violent experience because he is no longer able to explore his sexuality in a safe environment, explore it with others in a safe environment, and he's been told that it's such a bad thing that even for God to give some sort of divinity to a prophet, he had to be born out of a Virgin Mary, right? So basically, slut shaming gave us shitloads of religion. That's what it did. So obviously, slut shaming is a very bad thing, and it goes back way back, thousands of years ago. That just the idea that a woman had sex is such a bad, scary idea that they had to create an entire religion around it just to deny that. That's the kind of mentality we're talking about. That's what we're talking about when you talk about feminism, when we talk about equal rights, when we talk about women's empowerment, and we don't talk about religion. And we don't talk about how religion has created psychopaths, healthy men, healthy young boys who could be who could be a great contribution to society, but they can't because they are caught in this idea. I watch a lot of Criminal Minds, and I watch a lot of SVU, Special Victims Unit, okay? So those of you who are familiar with these crime-centric TV shows would know what criminal profiling is like, right? At least the, Hollywood version of it, which is not bad. It's actually quite accurate. And I've recently started watching The Alienists too. For old school people, this is set in the 20s, I guess. Actually, a little bit recent than that. No, it's set in the 20s. It's criminal profiling in the 20s, so it's The Alienists. Go watch that. So I watch a lot of Criminal Minds, and I watch a lot of SVU, and I see a lot of criminal profiling. And so many of these concepts are very Freudian, Something that happened to a criminal in their childhood, something that happened to them, something they saw something happening to somebody else, even if it was not happening to them. Exposure, early age exposure to psychological and or physical trauma. There is a reason we have child protective services. There is a reason we have licensed daycare who are supposed to only employ people who have gone through training and programming how to deal with young children. There's a reason we have all of these checks and balances in place to make sure that the most vulnerable in our society are protected. And children are a very special case of vulnerable demographic because they are our future too, right? So whereas seniors are also vulnerable in a lot of ways, and you could say that a lot of people who have limited abilities are also vulnerable in a lot of places, children are a completely different category because what we do to them, with them, is what our society is going to look like 20 years from now. Which is why I'm so proud of the children who are going out on the streets in the U.S. right now, because that gives me hope. These kids are going to vote in the next elections. Can you imagine the change these guys are going to bring about? And politicians are scared to go after kids. You can't go after kids. Even Trump is shitting his pants going after kids, right? He hasn't gone after kids yet. There's a reason for that, because they have a very pure mindset. They look at the world. If you expose them to right morality, if you expose them to right ideas, they will make a better world. Little bit of a tangent here. When I was younger, I was 5 years of age, and then we had a weird coffee table in our house, and it had a little compartment things in it. So I used to climb under it, and that was my thinking space, right? So anytime I had like some weird idea or something that I really, really need to go Socrates about, I would just go climb under it, and I'll sit there and, because my mom is amazing. I love my mom. I love her to death, but oh my God, I can't have a conversation with her that is not about clothes or anything else. So I would just climb under it, and I would sit there, and I would think about things. And then this one day, I was half asleep, half awake, and then I started thinking about my grandfather. And I was like, okay, I have a dad. My dad had a dad. His dad had a dad. Who was the first dad? That was my idea. I was like, okay, I don't know who the first father was. So I went to my dad and I asked him, I was like, who was the first father? And then he was like, oh, it was a monkey. And then, as best as he could, he explained evolution to a 5-year-old. Right? Yeah, so that was my introduction to science. That was my introduction to skepticism. Later on, I had a debate in my school with my teacher, and she was adamant in saying that communism and atheism are the same things. And then he explained to me at 13 years of age how they're not the same things, and he explained the Communist Manifesto to me. Then later on, when I Skyped him, and I was already here, and it was a few years ago, it was 6, 7 years ago, when I was like, Dad, I don't think there is a God. Because I'd always been a very secularist person. I wasn't always atheist. I was more, pantheistic. Yeah, one religion. There's different ways. Whatever. Let's just do you. I'm still gonna have sex and have their drinks, but I don't care what the religion says. I can ignore it for now. So I was like one of those people. And it just one day I was just like lying in bed and it just dawned on me. I was thinking about atoms and energy and Large Hadron Collider because I was obsessed with it at the time. This was the time when Higgs boson was discovered and whatnot. And then I was like, I don't think there's a God because it just doesn't fit into the equation. It was literally like waking up one day and be like, oh, okay, and going about your business. So I talked to him and I told him that, and he was like, of course there isn't. And I was like, holy shit, you've been an atheist your whole life. He's like, because I could now see all the signs. And I was like, why didn't you tell me? And he was like, this is not something I can teach you. You just come to this conclusion on your own. I can just give you education. Those were his words. So that was my foundation. That's why I did not turn out to be as fucked up as that father who just killed his kids because they went to school and took their hijab off. So this is, I know it sounds very anecdotal, but there are tons and tons of studies out there that tell you the kind of environment a child has, intellectual, physical environment the child has, that's the kind of, they're going to take that experience, and then when they grow up, it's going to have a big impact on how they are. Now, that's what we see when we see a lot of ex-Muslims coming out of religion, because a lot of them are coming out of very repressed families, a lot of psychological, emotional trauma, a lot of physical trauma in a lot of cases too, which is why in the beginning we see a lot of enemy. We see a lot of going to the other spectrum, right? Like, I'm going to go be angry, and that's great. I think they should be allowed that, they should have that breathing room where they can go all Hitchens on everybody they meet. I love it. I loved Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens.
Oh.
Right? Yeah, so you should go Hitchens on everybody. And I still go Hitchens on a lot of people who talk about religion in Urdu in Pakistan. That's why I'm still like, under certain people's watch list. It's fine. But, and then after they go through all that entire phase, you start to see some articulation come to their arguments. First, you just hear arguments, and you see like, this is why I left. This is bullshit. I hate this. I'm going to go take my hijab off, and then I'm going to go post a sexy photo. Everybody should do that. All women should do that, by the way. But in that particular moment, when they realized that they were told lies, and that impacted them, that prohibited them from exploring their sexuality, their intellectual pursuits, destroyed a lot of the potential that they could have experimented with, you see that anger. And then a lot of these people, they turn out okay. Because they find communities like this one. They find communities who are there to help them. They find people who have experience of a balanced childhood, a balanced lifestyle, and who are able to handle these situations and provide them the support they don't have from their own families. Which is why I think it's very, very important for communities like this to exist, especially when it comes to women. Especially when it comes to women. I'm going to breathe, okay?